The bitter mountain wind stung Rebecca Jordan's face as she drove her stolen horse harder through the snowdrift. The animals labored breathing forming clouds in the frigid December air of 1878. Behind her, the distant shouts of her family echoed through the pines, their lanterns bobbing like vengeful spirits in the twilight as they closed the gap between them and their runaway daughter. Rebecca clutched the reins with numbing fingers, her body trembling not just from the cold, but from the terror of what awaited her if they caught her. She'd escaped from the family ranch outside Independence, California, 3 hours earlier, taking nothing but her mother's locket and the clothes on her back. Her crime was unforgivable in her father's eyes, refusing to marry Henry Blackstone, the wealthy mine owner who was 3 times her age and known throughout Inyo County for his cruelty toward his previous 2 wives. "You'll marry him and save this family from ruin." Her father had roared when she'd refused the arrangement, his hand striking her cheek with enough force to split her lip. That was when she knew she had to flee. The snowfall had intensified since then, a blessing that partially concealed her tracks, but a curse that made progress through the mountain pass treacherous. Rebecca's horse, poor old Birch, who'd been with the family for years, was failing beneath her, his gait becoming increasingly unsteady as they climbed higher into the Sierra Nevada. "There she is." The voice of her eldest brother Thomas cut through the howling wind. "Head her off at Farwell Pass." Rebecca's heart sank. They knew these mountains better than she did. Farwell Pass was the only navigable route through this section of the range in winter. If they cut her off there, she would have nowhere to go but back into their waiting arms and then to the altar with Blackstone. Tears froze on her cheeks as Birch stumbled again, his strength giving out. The poor animal had given everything he had. "I'm sorry," she whispered, patting his heaving neck as she urged him forward one last time. "Just a little further." As they crested the ridge that led to Farwell Pass, Rebecca saw a figure waiting ahead, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Her stomach twisted with dread. Had one of her brothers already circled around to block her escape? But as she drew closer, she realized this wasn't any of her brothers. This stranger sat tall in the saddle, his broad-shouldered frame wrapped in a heavy sheepskin coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. She pulled Birch to a halt, the exhausted animal grateful for the reprieve. Rebecca looked back over her shoulder, seeing the lights of her pursuers growing closer. There was nowhere to run. The stranger urged his horse forward, and as he approached, Rebecca could see he was leading another horse, a powerful chestnut mare, already saddled and ready to ride. "Miss Jordan." The man called, his voice deep and steady against the wind. "I reckon you could use a fresh horse about now." Rebecca stared in disbelief. "How do you know my name?" The man pushed back his hat, revealing a handsome face with a strong jaw, weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, even in the fading light, were a startling green. "Name's Grant Hayes. Heard in town you might be needing some help tonight. Your friend Martha at the general store mentioned you were in trouble." He gestured to the chestnut mare. "This is Penny. She's the fastest horse in the county and knows these mountains better than most men." The shouts behind them grew louder. Rebecca had no time to question this unexpected salvation. "Why would you help me?" she asked, even as she slid from Birch's back, her legs nearly buckling from cold and exhaustion. Grant Hayes dismounted in one fluid motion, helping steady her with a strong, gentle hand. "Let's just say I've got no love for men who force women into marriages they don't want. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I've had my share of run-ins with the Jordan family. Helping you is my pleasure." He lifted her onto the chestnut mare with ease. "Follow the pass west. It opens onto Coldwater Canyon. 2 miles down you'll find a cabin with a blue door." It belongs to my aunt. She's away visiting family in Sacramento until spring. You'll be safe there." "What about you?" Rebecca asked, gathering the reins of the fresh horse. "I'll lead them away, give you time to get clear." He handed her a small pack. Food, matches, and a map. Key to the cabins under the third rock from the door. The voices were closer now, perhaps only a few minutes behind. Rebecca looked down at the stranger who had appeared like an answered prayer. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Hayes. Thank me by living the life you choose, Miss Jordan." His green eyes held hers for a moment. "Now ride hard and don't look back." With that, he slapped the mare's flank and Rebecca was off, the powerful horse cutting through the snow with newfound energy. As she entered the pass, she heard Grant Hayes behind her, mounting Birch and heading in the opposite direction, shouting loudly to draw her pursuers away. Rebecca bent low over Penny's neck, whispering encouragement as they navigated the treacherous path. The wind howled around them, snow stinging her face, but for the first time since she'd fled her father's house, she felt a flicker of hope. She had no idea who Grant Hayes was or why he'd risked himself to help her. But as the lights of her family's lanterns faded behind her, Rebecca made a silent vow that if she survived this night, she would find a way to repay this stranger's kindness. The cabin appeared just where Grant had said it would be, a sturdy log structure nestled against the mountainside, nearly invisible in the darkness, except for its distinctive blue door. Rebecca's fingers were so numb she could barely dismount, and it took 3 attempts to retrieve the key from beneath the frost-covered rock. Inside, the cabin was cold but dry. Rebecca quickly found kindling and logs stacked neatly by a stone fireplace. Within minutes, she had a small fire started, its warmth beginning to chase away the bone-deep chill. She tended to Penny, bringing the horse into the attached lean-to stable, removing her saddle and bridle, and providing her with fresh water and oats she found in a storage bin. Only when the horse was settled did Rebecca allow herself to collapse near the fire, the events of the day crashing over her. Her entire life had been uprooted in a matter of hours. She had no possessions beyond the clothes she wore and the locket around her neck. No money, no future, nothing but her freedom, and that had been secured only through the intervention of a stranger. "Grant Hayes," she whispered, putting another log on the fire. Who was he? Why had Martha told him about her situation? And what would happen to him now, having interfered with the Jordans' pursuit? The questions swirled in her mind as exhaustion claimed her, and she fell asleep on the rough wooden floor beside the hearth, the fire's glow painting shadows across her face. Rebecca woke to brilliant sunlight streaming through the cabin's small windows. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This wasn't her room at the family ranch. Then yesterday's memories flooded back. Her father's ultimatum, her desperate escape, and the mysterious cowboy at the mountain pass. She sat up stiffly, her body aching from the hard floor and the previous day's ride. The fire had died down to embers, but the cabin had retained enough heat to keep her from freezing. Outside, the world was transformed. A pristine blanket of white covered everything, sparkling in the morning light. Rebecca explored the cabin, finding it simple but well-stocked. There were preserved foods in a small pantry, clothing in a chest that might have belonged to Grant's aunt, and even books stacked on a shelf beside the bed. It was a haven, but Rebecca knew she couldn't stay long. The Jordans knew these mountains. They would search every cabin and shack. After checking on Penny, who seemed recovered from yesterday's exertions, Rebecca returned to the cabin to plan her next move. She would need to reach a town, find work, perhaps make her way to Sacramento or even San Francisco, where she could disappear among the crowds. A sound outside froze her in place, the crunch of snow under boots. Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked frantically for a weapon, finding only a cast iron skillet hanging by the stove. She gripped it tightly, positioning herself beside the door, ready to swing if one of her brothers entered. 3 sharp knocks made her jump. "Miss Jordan." "It's Grant Hayes. Are you all right in there?" Relief washed over her so strongly that her knees nearly gave way. She set down the skillet and opened the door to find Grant standing there, his horse behind him, both covered in a dusting of fresh snow. His face was bruised, a split in his lip crusted with dried blood. "Mr. Hayes," she gasped, "you're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, though he winced as he spoke. "May I come in?" Rebecca stepped aside, noticing how he favored his left leg as he entered. "What happened? Did my family do this?" Grant removed his hat, revealing dark hair flecked with melting snow. "Your brothers and I had a disagreement about which direction you'd gone." A wry smile tugged at his injured lip. "I convinced them you'd headed east toward Nevada. They believed you, eventually." He eased himself onto a chair by the table. "Though your brother Thomas has a mighty convincing right hook." Rebecca hurried to the pantry, returning with a jar of preserved meat and bread. "You must be hungry, and we should tend to those wounds." "I don't want to impose. You saved my life," Rebecca interrupted, already pouring water into a basin. "The least I can do is clean your cuts." Grant fell silent as she worked, gently dabbing at his split lip and the bruise darkening his jaw. This close, she could see flecks of gold in his green eyes, the way his dark lashes cast shadows on his cheeks. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with the weathered look of a man who spent most of his life outdoors. "Why did you come back?" she asked finally. "You've already risked enough for me." Grant met her gaze steadily. "I needed to make sure you were safe, and to warn you your father's offering a reward for your return. $500. Rebecca's stomach clenched. "That's a fortune." "Which means every opportunist and bounty hunter in 3 counties will be looking for you." He leaned forward, wincing slightly. "You can't stay here. It's too close to Independence." "I know," Rebecca said softly, "but I have nowhere else to go." Grant was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Jordan. I'm headed to a ranch outside of Sacramento, the Double Creek. The owner, Mr. Wilson, is an old friend. He's offered me work breaking horses, and his wife mentioned needing help with household matters. It would be safe there, far from your family's reach." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "You're offering to take me with you? It's a long journey, especially in winter, but we could be there in 2 weeks if the weather holds." His expression grew serious. "I understand if you don't want to trust a stranger. But I give you my word, Miss Jordan, I'll see you safely to the Double Creek and ask nothing in return." Rebecca studied him, this man who had already done more for her than anyone in her life. There was something in his eyes, a steadiness, an honesty that made her want to trust him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again. A shadow passed over Grant's face. "Let's just say I understand what it means to run from something that threatens to destroy you." He stood, grimacing slightly at the movement. "Think about it. I'll ready the horses. We should leave by noon if we want to make it to the next shelter before dark." As he stepped outside, Rebecca found herself watching through the window as he moved through the snow toward the lean-to. There was something about the way he carried himself, a kind of quiet dignity despite his injuries, that touched her. She had 2 choices: trust this man who had already saved her once, or try to make her way alone through winter mountains with her family hunting her. When framed that way, it hardly seemed like a choice at all. By noon, they were riding west, deeper into the Sierra Nevada. Grant led the way on his gray stallion, with Rebecca following on Penny. They traveled in silence mostly, saving their energy for the difficult terrain. The snow had stopped, but the cold remained fierce, seeping through Rebecca's borrowed coat and gloves. As the short winter day began to fade, Grant guided them to a narrow trail that wound through a stand of towering pines. "There's a line shack up ahead," he called back to her. "Used by cattlemen in the summer. We can shelter there tonight." The shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a small iron stove in one corner. It was a tight space for 2 people, but infinitely preferable to spending the night in the open. While Grant tended the horses in the crude lean-to attached to the back of the shack, Rebecca got a fire going in the stove. The interior warmed quickly, and she removed her outer layers, hanging them to dry. When Grant returned, stamping snow from his boots, Rebecca had a simple meal prepared from the supplies he'd brought: jerky softened in hot water with dried beans and a pinch of salt. "It's not much," she apologized, handing him a tin plate. "It's a feast compared to what I'm used to on the trail," Grant replied, settling onto one of the 2 crude benches. "Thank you." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the occasional pop from the stove and the whistle of wind through the shack's imperfect seams. When they'd finished, Grant produced a small flask from his coat. "Whiskey," he explained, offering it to her. "Just a sip. Helps with the cold." Rebecca hesitated. She'd never tasted spirits before but accepted the flask, taking a tiny swallow. The liquor burned a fiery trail down her throat, making her cough. Grant smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "First time," she nodded, handing back the flask. "My father drank, but he never allowed my mother or me to touch it, said it wasn't proper." Grant took a sip himself, then recapped the flask. "And what does your mother think of your father's arrangement with Blackstone?" Pain lanced through Rebecca at the question. "My mother died 3 years ago, pneumonia." "I'm sorry," Grant said softly. "That must have been difficult." It was. Rebecca stared into the glow of the stove. "She was the buffer between my father and me. After she was gone, She trailed off, unwilling to speak of the increasing harshness of her life at the Jordan ranch. Grant didn't press. Instead, he asked, "Tell me about your refusal to marry Blackstone." "That took courage." Rebecca looked up, surprised by his perception. "Not courage, desperation. I've seen how he treated his last wife before she died, the bruises she tried to hide when she came to town." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I decided I would rather die in these mountains than live as his wife." "And now, what do you want for your future?" It was a question Rebecca had barely allowed herself to consider. Dreams were dangerous things in the Jordan household, quickly crushed by her father's practical demands. "I want." She began hesitantly. "I want to work with my hands, to create something beautiful. My mother taught me to sew. I used to make dresses for the ladies in Independence, before my father decided it was beneath our family's dignity." Grant nodded thoughtfully. "Sacramento has fine dress shops. Perhaps you could find apprenticeship there. Perhaps." Rebecca smiled at the thought, then grew serious again. "What about you, Mr. Hayes? What drives you to travel these mountains in winter?" A guarded look crossed his face. "Work. The Double Creek pays well for good horsebreakers." Rebecca sensed there was more to his story but didn't pry. Everyone had secrets, and Grant Hayes had earned the right to keep his. "We should sleep," he said, rising from the bench. "Dawn comes early and we have many miles to cover tomorrow." There was only one bedroll, which Grant insisted Rebecca take. He would sleep, he said, with his saddle as a pillow near the stove. Despite her protests, he was immovable on the subject, and eventually Rebecca relented, wrapping herself in the thick buffalo robe while Grant settled on the floor, his coat pulled over him. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly as he stoked the stove one last time. "Thank you for everything." He glanced back at her, the firelight catching in his green eyes. Get some rest, Miss Jordan. We've got a long road ahead. As Rebecca drifted toward sleep, she found herself wondering about the man who slept just a few feet away. Who was Grant Hayes, really? And what was he running from that let him understand her plight so well? The next 5 days fell into a pattern. They would rise before dawn, eat a cold breakfast, and ride until the light began to fail. Each night they found shelter, sometimes in abandoned cabins, once in a cave, twice in shacks similar to the first. The weather remained mercifully clear, though bitterly cold, and they made good progress through the mountains. During their journey, Rebecca learned fragments about her companion. Grant Hayes had grown up in Missouri, the son of a horse trader. He'd come west after the war, working as a ranch hand, a stage coach driver, and occasionally as a scout for the Army. He spoke little about the last few years, and Rebecca noticed how he tensed whenever independence or the surrounding area was mentioned. For his part, Grant proved to be a patient teacher. He showed Rebecca how to build a fire in windy conditions, how to read the weather from the clouds, how to spot game trails that might provide easier passage through difficult terrain. His manner remained unfailingly respectful, if sometimes reserved. On the 6th day, as they crossed a high plateau covered in pristine snow, Grant suddenly raised his hand for Rebecca to stop. He sat motionless in the saddle, listening. "What is it?" Rebecca whispered, her heart beginning to race. "Riders," Grant said quietly, pointing to the south. "At least 3, moving fast." Rebecca strained her eyes but saw nothing across the vast white expanse. Could it be my family, possibly, or bounty hunters? Grant surveyed their position, then pointed to a ridge of rocks half a mile ahead. "We need cover. Follow me and stay close." They urged their horses forward, no longer trying to hide their tracks. Speed was their only advantage now. As they neared the rocks, Rebecca finally heard what Grant had detected: the distant rhythm of galloping horses. They reached the ridge, a tumble of granite boulders thrusting up through the snow like ancient bones. Grant dismounted quickly, helping Rebecca down. "Take the horses behind those rocks," he instructed, drawing a Winchester rifle from his saddle scabbard. "Stay out of sight." Rebecca led the nervous animals behind the largest boulder, her hands shaking as she tied them securely. When she returned, Grant was crouched at the edge of their shelter, rifle ready, watching the approaching riders. They appeared through a swirl of snow, 4 men on horseback, moving with purpose. Rebecca's breath caught as she recognized the lead rider. "That's Thomas," she whispered. "My eldest brother." Grant's expression hardened. "And the others, the one in the buckskin jacket, is my brother William." "The other 2, I don't recognize them." She studied the strangers, taking in their rough appearance and the way they rode, alert, weapons visible. "They look like hired guns." "They are," Grant confirmed grimly. "Your father's not taking chances this time." He pulled Rebecca deeper into the shelter of the rocks. "We're outnumbered and they'll have seen our tracks by now. We can't outrun them in open country." Fear tightened Rebecca's throat. "What do we do?" Grant checked his rifle, then pulled a revolver from his belt, checking its load as well. "I'm going to lead them away from here. You'll take Penny and head northwest toward the tree line. There's a trading post about 15 miles from here, Jenkins' place. Wait for me there." "No." Rebecca grabbed his arm. "They'll kill you." Something flickered in Grant's eyes, surprise at her concern, perhaps. "I don't plan on dying today, Miss Jordan." He pressed the revolver into her hand. "Take this. 6 shots. Use them only if you have no choice." The sound of the approaching riders grew louder. Grant peered around the edge of the boulder. "They're splitting up, looking for our trail." He turned back to Rebecca, his face inches from hers. "When I ride out, count to 100, then go. Don't stop for anything until you reach Jenkins' place." Rebecca clutched the revolver, suddenly terrified of being separated from him. In less than a week, this man had become her only ally, her protector, perhaps even her friend. "I can't leave you," she whispered. Grant's expression softened. He reached out, his gloved hand gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You can, and you will, because you're stronger than you know, Rebecca Jordan." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and something in the way he said it made her heart skip a beat. Before she could respond, he was gone, slipping back to where his gray stallion waited. Seconds later, she heard him ride out, shouting to draw the attention of their pursuers. "Over here, Jordan. Come and get me, you bastards." Gunshots erupted, followed by the thunder of hooves. Rebecca began counting, her lips moving silently as she prayed for Grant's safety. At 100, she rushed to Penny, mounted swiftly, and urged the mare in the direction Grant had indicated. As she rode, Rebecca could still hear distant gunfire behind her. Each shot made her flinch, imagining Grant falling, bleeding into the snow. But she kept riding, bent low over Penny's neck, pushing through her fear. The trading post appeared just as darkness was falling, a cluster of log buildings surrounded by a rough stockade fence. Rebecca approached cautiously, the revolver hidden in the folds of her coat. A grizzled man with one arm emerged from the main building as she rode up. "Jenkins," she called, her voice hoarse from cold. "That's me," he confirmed, eyeing her suspiciously. "What brings a woman alone to my post this time of year?" "Grant Hayes sent me," Rebecca said, dismounting stiffly. "He said to wait for him here." Jenkins' demeanor changed instantly. "Hayes? Well now, that's different. Come in, miss. Any friend of Grant's is welcome here." Inside, the trading post was warm and surprisingly clean. Jenkins introduced himself as Ezekiel, a former trapper who'd lost his arm to a grizzly and settled into trading. He asked no questions about why Rebecca was traveling with Grant or why she was alone now, simply providing her with hot food and coffee. As night fell with no sign of Grant, Rebecca's anxiety grew. Jenkins tried to reassure her. "Hayes is the most capable man I know in these mountains. If anyone can outride those men, it's him." But when morning came with still no sign of Grant, Rebecca could wait no longer. She asked Jenkins for a map and information about the surrounding area. If Grant had been captured or worse, she needed to continue to the Double Creek Ranch alone. Jenkins was explaining the route when the door burst open, letting in a blast of cold air. Rebecca whirled around, the revolver half drawn from her pocket. Grant Hayes stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, his face haggard with exhaustion but very much alive. Rebecca didn't think she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck in relief. He staggered slightly before his arms came around her, holding her tightly against his chest. "You're alive," she whispered against the cold fabric of his coat. "Told you I didn't plan on dying," he murmured into her hair. Jenkins cleared his throat loudly. "I'll, check on your horses," he said, slipping past them and out the door. Rebecca suddenly realized the impropriety of her actions and pulled back, her cheeks flushing. "I'm sorry. I was just—" "Don't apologize," Grant said softly, his hand still resting lightly on her waist. "It's good to be missed." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been growing since that first meeting on the snowy pass. Grant broke the moment first, moving toward the fire. "Your brothers are persistent, I'll give them that. I led them 20 miles south before doubling back. Lost my hat in the process," he added ruefully. "Were you hurt?" Rebecca asked, noticing how he favored his right arm. "Bullet grazed my shoulder, nothing serious." He sat heavily in a chair by the hearth. "But we can't stay here long. Once they realize I've given them the slip, they'll start searching every outpost and cabin in the region." Rebecca sat across from him. "How long to the Double Creek Ranch?" 8 days, maybe 10 with the weather turning. Grant's face grew serious. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something about why I'm really helping you." Her heart beat faster at his use of her first name again. "I'm listening." Grant stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Sarah. She lived near Independence with her father. I was working as a guide for the army then, gone for months at a time. His jaw tightened. While I was away, Henry Blackstone saw her in town and decided he wanted her. Made her father an offer marry Sarah to Blackstone and all the family's debts would be forgiven. Rebecca felt sick, knowing where this story was heading. Her father agreed. By the time I returned, the wedding had already happened. Grant's voice grew hollow. I tried to see her to help her leave if that's what she wanted. Blackstone's men caught me on his property, beat me half to death and told me if I ever came back, they'd finish the job. "What happened to Sarah?" Rebecca asked softly. "She died 6 months later, fell down the stairs," they said. Grant's green eyes, when they met Rebecca's, burned with old pain. "When I heard in town that Blackstone was set to marry again, that a young woman was being forced into his bed, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not again." Rebecca reached across the space between them, taking his hand in hers. "I'm so sorry, Grant." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I should have told you sooner. I didn't want you to think I was using you to settle an old score." "Is that what you're doing?" Grant shook his head slowly. "I thought it was at first, but now—" His eyes held hers. "Now I just want to see you safe, free to live the life you choose." The honesty in his voice touched something deep within Rebecca. This man, who had suffered his own loss at Blackstone's hands, had risked everything to save her from the same fate, not for revenge, but because it was right. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly, "and for everything else." Grant nodded, seeming relieved that she hadn't pulled away. "We should rest while we can. Jenkins says there's a storm coming. We'll need to leave at first light to stay ahead of it." That night, in the small room Jenkins provided, Rebecca lay awake long after Grant's breathing had evened into sleep. He'd insisted on making his bed on the floor again, leaving the narrow cot for her. In the darkness, she pondered the strange turn her life had taken. 2 weeks ago, she had been Rebecca Jordan, daughter of one of the most prominent ranchers in Inyo County, her future mapped out according to her father's will. Now she was a fugitive, riding through winter mountains with a man she barely knew but trusted with her life. More unsettling were the feelings growing within her feelings that went beyond gratitude. When she'd thought Grant might be dead, the pain had been unexpectedly intense. And when he'd returned, the relief had overwhelmed her usual reserve. Rebecca turned on the cot, facing the shadowy form of Grant sleeping across the room. What would happen when they reached the Double Creek Ranch? Would he simply deliver her to safety and ride away? The thought brought an ache to her chest that surprised her with its intensity. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into uneasy dreams of pursuit through endless snow, with Grant always just ahead, urging her forward toward an unseen sanctuary. Morning brought the promised storm, a howling gale that drove snow horizontally across the trading post's small windows. Grant conferred with Jenkins, studying maps and discussing routes, while Rebecca prepared provisions for the journey ahead. By mid-morning, the storm showed signs of weakening. Grant announced they would leave within the hour, hoping to make significant progress before nightfall. Jenkins provided them with additional supplies, refusing payment. "Just tell folks at Double Creek old Jenkins is still kicking," he told Grant as they prepared to depart. "And that he remembers his friends." As they rode away from the trading post, Rebecca noticed Grant was unusually quiet, his gaze constantly scanning the horizon. The snow had stopped, but the sky remained threatening, heavy clouds hanging low over the mountains. "What's troubling you?" she finally asked, guiding Penny alongside his gray stallion. Grant hesitated before answering. "Jenkins heard rumors while trading with a passing hunter. Your father's doubled the bounty, $1,000 now." Rebecca felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "That's more money than most men see in years. Which means we can't trust anyone from here on." Grant's expression was grim. "We'll avoid settlements, stick to the wilderness routes." "Is that safer?" "From bounty hunters, yes. From the elements." He glanced at the sky. "That's another matter." They rode hard through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By evening, they had covered nearly 20 miles, descending from the high country into a more sheltered valley. Grant located a small cave set into a hillside, deep enough to provide shelter but not so deep as to potentially house predators. While Rebecca gathered wood for a fire, Grant constructed a crude barrier across the cave entrance using branches and their blankets, creating a windbreak that would also hide the glow of their fire from anyone passing nearby. The temperature dropped rapidly as darkness fell. Despite the fire and the cave's protection, Rebecca couldn't stop shivering. Grant noticed and wordlessly removed his heavy coat, draping it around her shoulders. "You'll freeze," she protested. "I've got the fire," he replied, though she could see goosebumps rising on his arms. "Besides, I'm used to the cold." Rebecca wasn't convinced, but the warmth of his coat was too tempting to refuse. It smelled of leather, wood smoke, and something distinctly masculine, distinctly Grant. They shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water warmed by the fire. As they ate, Grant told her more about the Double Creek Ranch, about Sam Wilson, the owner, who had fought alongside Grant during a brief stint with the Army, about Wilson's kind-hearted wife, Eleanor, who ran the household with gentle efficiency, about the sprawling operation with its hundreds of cattle and dozens of horses. "It sounds wonderful," Rebecca said, trying to imagine herself there. "Do you think they'll truly have a place for me?" "Sam owes me his life," Grant said simply. "And Eleanor's always saying she needs more help with the accounts and household management. You'll be welcome there, I promise." Rebecca studied his face in the firelight. "And you, how long will you stay?" Something flickered in Grant's eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "I don't usually stay anywhere long, but Double Creek, it could be different." "Because of the work," Grant met her gaze directly. "That's part of it." The unspoken implication hung between them, charging the air with possibility. Rebecca felt her cheeks flush and looked away, suddenly aware of how small the cave was, how intimate this moment felt. Grant cleared his throat and stood, moving to check the barrier at the cave entrance. "Storm's picking up again," he observed. "We should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult." They arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, but the cave's limited space meant they were still only a few feet apart. Rebecca lay awake, listening to the wind howl outside and watching the fire cast dancing shadows on the rock ceiling. "Grant," she whispered, uncertain if he was still awake. "Yes." His voice came immediately, suggesting he had been as restless as she was. "I'm afraid." The admission was difficult. Rebecca had spent years hiding her fears, presenting the strong face her father demanded. "Of what?" Grant asked softly. "Of everything. Of being found. Of not being found. Of reaching Double Creek and still not knowing who I am or what I'm meant to be." The fire popped and shifted, sending a shower of sparks upward. For a long moment, Grant was silent, and Rebecca thought perhaps she'd said too much. Then she heard movement, and suddenly he was beside her, sitting with his back against the cave wall, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "When I came back from the war," he said quietly, I didn't know who I was anymore. The things I'd seen, the things I'd done, they changed me. I spent years drifting, taking whatever work came my way, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Rebecca sat up, wrapping his coat more tightly around herself. What changed? Grant stared into the fire. Nothing yet. But lately I've been thinking there might be more to life than just surviving it. His eyes, when they met hers, held a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Meeting you, it's made me wonder if maybe it's time to stop running. Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest. What would you run toward instead? His hand found hers in the firelight, warm and calloused. Something worth building, worth fighting for. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings. Rebecca was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way his shoulder brushed against hers, of how easy it would be to lean just slightly and rest her head against him. Before she could decide whether to act on the impulse, a sound from outside froze them both, the distant but unmistakable whinny of a horse. Grant was on his feet in an instant, motioning for Rebecca to stay silent. He moved to the barrier, carefully shifting a branch to create a small opening through which to look. "Riders," he whispered. "Two of them about half a mile down the valley." Rebecca's stomach clenched with fear. "My brothers? Can't tell. They've stopped, might be making camp for the night." Grant returned to her side, his expression serious. "We need to be ready to move if they start heading this way at first light." The peaceful moment was shattered, replaced by the now familiar tension of pursuit. Grant checked his weapons, then rearranged their bedrolls to be ready for a quick departure. When he finally lay down again, it was closer to Rebecca than before, his rifle within easy reach. "Try to sleep," he told her. "I'll keep watch for a while." Rebecca nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily now. As she settled back onto her bedroll, she found herself reaching for Grant's hand in the darkness. After a moment's hesitation, his fingers intertwined with hers. They stayed that way, connected in the firelight, until exhaustion finally pulled Rebecca into restless slumber. Her last conscious thought was that, despite the danger that surrounded them, she had never felt as safe as she did with Grant Hayes beside her. Dawn broke with an eerie silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by fresh snow. Grant woke Rebecca before first light, his finger pressed to his lips in warning. The riders they'd spotted the previous night were on the move, and from what Grant could see, they were heading directly for the cave. They packed quickly and silently, extinguishing the fire and erasing as much evidence of their presence as possible. The cave had a narrow back opening, barely large enough for them to squeeze through, which led to a steep slope behind the hillside. Grant went first, helping Rebecca navigate the treacherous descent. Their horses, hidden in a stand of pines nearby, nickered softly as they approached. Grant murmured quiet reassurances as he saddled them, working with practiced efficiency despite the cold that numbed their fingers. "We'll head west through that ravine," he whispered, pointing to a narrow cut in the landscape. "It's rough going, but it will hide our tracks better than open ground." Rebecca nodded, pulling herself into Penny's saddle. As they set off, she glanced back at the cave, now barely visible on the hillside above. Had they left too much evidence of their passage? How close were their pursuers? The ravine proved as difficult as Grant had warned, a twisted path between steep walls of rock, the ground littered with loose stones partially hidden by snow. They were forced to proceed at a walk, leading the horses as often as riding them. By mid-morning they had emerged onto more level ground, a vast forest of pines stretching before them. Grant paused, studying the terrain. "No sign of pursuit," he said, though his expression remained vigilant. "But we should keep moving. There's a river crossing about 10 miles ahead." If we can make it there and cross before nightfall, we'll have a natural barrier between us and anyone following." They rode steadily through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and dried fruit. The forest provided good cover, but made progress slower than Rebecca would have liked. Every cracking branch, every rustle in the underbrush made her tense, expecting to see her brothers or bounty hunters emerging from the trees. Grant remained outwardly calm, but Rebecca noticed how his hand often strayed to his rifle, how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. The easy conversation that had begun to develop between them was replaced by necessary silence, both straining to hear any sound of pursuit. Late in the afternoon, they emerged from the forest onto the banks of a swollen river. The water rushed past, dark and intimidating, carrying chunks of ice in its current. "The crossing's supposed to be shallow," Grant said, dismounting to survey the river. "But the melt from the recent storms has made it deeper than I'd like." Rebecca studied the rushing water, anxiety building in her chest. "Is there another way across?" "Not for miles in either direction." Grant tested the bank with his boot, frowning at how the earth crumbled beneath his weight. "We don't have much choice. Your family knows these mountains. If we delay, they'll find us." He led his gray stallion to a section of the river that seemed marginally less turbulent. "I'll go first. If it's passable, I'll signal you to follow. Stay directly in my path. The footing will be surer where I've already crossed." Rebecca nodded, her mouth dry with fear as she watched Grant urge his horse into the water. The stallion balked initially, then entered with hesitant steps. The water immediately reached past the animal's knees, then up to its belly as they moved further from shore. Halfway across, Grant's horse stumbled on the uneven riverbed, nearly unseating him. Rebecca gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as man and beast struggled to regain their footing. After a heart-stopping moment, they recovered and continued, finally reaching the opposite bank. Grant turned and waved for her to follow, pointing to indicate the path she should take. Rebecca gathered her courage and nudged Penny forward. The mare was more willing than Grant's stallion had been, stepping into the water with surprising confidence. The shock of the cold was immediate. Water splashed up, soaking Rebecca's boots and the lower part of her dress. She concentrated on following Grant's path, guiding Penny toward the spots where his horse had found secure footing. They were nearly across when disaster struck. A large branch, carried by the swift current, slammed into Penny's legs. The mare whinnied in panic, rearing up and throwing Rebecca from the saddle. The icy water closed over her head, the current immediately dragging her downstream. Rebecca fought to surface, her heavy clothes weighing her down, her lungs burning for air. She managed to break the surface once, gasping for breath before the river pulled her under again. Through the roaring in her ears, she heard Grant shouting her name. Something solid struck her outstretched hand, a branch. She grabbed it reflexively, using it to pull herself up again. Grant was in the water, fighting the current to reach her. Their eyes met across the churning surface, and she saw raw determination in his face. He lunged forward, his hand closing around her wrist with iron strength. With a mighty effort, he pulled her toward him, wrapping an arm around her waist. Together they battled the current, inching toward the shore. Rebecca could feel her strength fading, her limbs growing numb from the cold. Only Grant's grip kept her from surrendering to the river's pull. Finally, they reached the shallows. Grant half carried, half dragged her onto the bank, both of them collapsing onto the snow-covered ground. For several moments they simply lay there, gasping for breath. "Rebecca," Grant's voice was ragged with effort and fear. "Are you hurt?" She tried to respond but could only cough, water spilling from her lips. Her entire body shook violently with cold, Grant cursed under his breath. "We need to get you warm. Now." He looked around frantically, spotting Penny, who had managed to cross the river and now stood nervously nearby. His own horse grazed a short distance away. With remarkable speed given his own sodden condition, Grant gathered wood and kindled a fire. He pulled dry clothes from his saddlebags, a spare shirt and pants that would be too large for Rebecca, but better than her wet garments. "You need to change," he told her, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll turn my back, but you have to get out of those wet clothes or you'll freeze to death." Rebecca nodded, her teeth chattering too violently for speech. As promised, Grant turned away, focusing on building up the fire. With fumbling fingers, Rebecca managed to remove her drenched dress and undergarments, pulling on Grant's dry clothes. The shirt hung nearly to her knees, the pants requiring several folds at the ankles. "Done," she managed to stammer. Grant turned back, quickly wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and guiding her close to the fire. "Your hair is still soaked," he murmured, gently removing the pins that held her dark tresses in place. "May I?" At her nod, he carefully spread her hair with his fingers, arranging it to dry more quickly in the heat from the fire. The gesture was surprisingly intimate, his touch gentle as he worked through the tangles. "You saved my life," Rebecca said when she could finally speak without her teeth chattering. Again, Grant's green eyes reflected the firelight as he looked at her. "I couldn't lose you," he said simply. The raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. He cleared his throat, seeming suddenly aware of the intensity of the moment. "You should try to sleep. Body needs rest to recover from cold like that." Rebecca nodded, though she was reluctant to break the connection between them. Grant arranged their bedrolls close to the fire, then hesitated. "I should check the horses," he said, though he made no move to leave. "Grant," Rebecca said softly, "I'm still cold." It was all the invitation he needed. Grant settled beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest. Rebecca nestled into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Better?" he asked, his voice a low rumble she could feel through his chest. "Yes," she whispered, and it was true. Despite the danger that still pursued them, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead in this moment, held safe in Grant's arms, Rebecca felt a peace she had never known before. They stayed that way through the night, Grant occasionally rising to add wood to the fire, but always returning to hold her. In the quiet hours before dawn, as Rebecca drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she felt his lips press gently against her hair, a touch so light she might have imagined it, yet one that sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that their ordeal in the river had cost them precious time. Rebecca's clothes were still damp, so she continued wearing Grant's spare shirt and pants, her dress tied to Penny's saddle to dry in the sun. "How much further to Double Creek?" she asked as they prepared to depart. 5 days, maybe 6, Grant replied, checking the cinch on his saddle. "We're making good progress despite everything." Rebecca caught the hesitation in his voice. "What aren't you telling me?" Grant sighed, turning to face her. "You're near drowning yesterday. It won't just slow us down. It will leave a trail. Anyone tracking us will know you went into the water, know you're vulnerable. You think they'll push harder to catch us? I would in their place." His expression was grave. "We need to change our route. Take a path they won't expect." He spread a crude map on the ground, pointing to their current position and then tracing a line northwest. "This way leads through higher country. It's more difficult terrain but less traveled. Might throw them off our trail." "Then that's the way we go," Rebecca said, her determination masking the fear that still lingered from yesterday's brush with death. They set off as the sun climbed higher, leaving the river behind and ascending into more rugged country. The path grew steeper, winding through stands of pine and fir. By midday, they had climbed high enough that Rebecca could look back and see the river as a silver ribbon cutting through the valley below. The new route proved challenging. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses around obstacles, a fallen tree blocking the path, a section of trail that had collapsed in a recent slide. Grant remained vigilant, frequently stopping to listen and scan their back trail for any sign of pursuit. Late in the afternoon, they crested a ridge and found themselves looking down on a small, hidden valley. A thin column of smoke rose from what appeared to be a small cabin nestled among the trees. Grant frowned at the sight. "That's not on the map. Should we avoid it?" Rebecca asked. He considered for a moment. "Normally, yes, but we're low on supplies and you could use a night in a proper shelter after yesterday." His eyes searched hers. "What do you think? It's your safety at stake." Rebecca was touched by his deference to her judgment. No man in her life, not her father, not her brothers, had ever treated her opinions as equal to their own. She studied the cabin below. "One night of warmth would help," she admitted. "But what if they recognize me? Or know about the bounty?" "We'll approach cautiously," Grant decided. "If anything feels wrong, we leave immediately." They descended into the valley as dusk gathered, approaching the cabin from downwind so the horses wouldn't be scented by any dogs. As they drew closer, they saw it was a small but well-maintained homestead, a log cabin with a stone chimney, a small barn, and what looked like a vegetable garden covered for the winter. A woman emerged from the cabin, a shotgun held casually in her arms. She was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face weathered by years in the mountains. "That's far enough," she called when they were still 30 yards away. "State your business." Grant raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "Madam, we're travelers headed to Sacramento, looking for shelter for the night, willing to pay or work for it." The woman squinted at them, her gaze lingering on Rebecca in her ill-fitting men's clothes. "You two married?" "Yes," Grant lied smoothly. "My wife had an accident crossing the river yesterday, lost most of her things." The woman studied them for a long moment, then lowered her shotgun slightly. "I'm Harriet Doyle. This is my place. Don't get many visitors, especially in winter." "Grant Hayes," he introduced himself, then gestured to Rebecca. "My wife, Rebecca." Harriet seemed to come to a decision. "You can stay in the barn, it's clean, got fresh hay. I'll bring you some hot food, but I don't want trouble, understand?" "Yes, madam," Grant agreed. "We're just passing through." The woman nodded once, then turned back toward the cabin. "Bring your horses around back. There's a pump for water and oats in the bin for the animals." As they led their mounts toward the barn, Rebecca whispered, "Why did you say we were married?" Grant glanced at her, a slight flush visible beneath his tan. "A woman alone with a man not her husband, it raises questions. This way she's less likely to be suspicious." Rebecca nodded, understanding the logic even as she felt a strange flutter at being called Grant's wife, even in pretense. The barn was indeed clean and well-maintained. They unsaddled the horses and settled them with food and water before arranging their own sleeping area in a corner filled with fresh hay. Grant had just started a small fire in the barn's iron stove when Harriet appeared with 2 bowls of stew and a loaf of bread. "Thank you," Rebecca said sincerely, accepting the food. "This is very kind." Harriet shrugged. "Mountain hospitality. Can't turn folks away when winter's coming on." She glanced between them curiously. "What brings you through these parts? Most folks take the main pass this time of year." Grant answered before Rebecca could. "Hunting work. Heard the ranches near Sacramento are hiring for spring roundup." Harriet didn't seem entirely convinced. "Well, Eat up and get some rest. I rise at dawn. You're welcome to coffee before you head out." After she left, Rebecca and Grant ate in grateful silence, the hot food reviving their spirits after the difficult day. When they had finished, Grant took the bowls outside to rinse them at the pump, returning to find Rebecca spreading their bedrolls on the hay. "I'll take this side," he said, indicating a spot several feet from where she had placed her own bedding. Rebecca hesitated. "You don't have to stay so far away, after last night." She felt her cheeks warm at the memory of sleeping in his arms. Grant's expression softened. "That was different. You needed warmth. And tonight I don't need comfort." The words came out more boldly than she intended, surprising them both. For a long moment, Grant simply looked at her, something unreadable in his green eyes. Then he moved his bedroll closer, not touching hers, but near enough that they could speak quietly. As they settled for the night, the only light coming from the small fire in the stove, Rebecca found herself studying Grant's profile. The past week had changed something between them, transforming their relationship from rescuer and rescued to something deeper, more complex. "What will happen when we reach Double Creek?" she asked softly. Grant turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. "You'll be safe there. Wilson and his wife will look after you." "And you?" He was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "For years I've never stayed anywhere longer than a season, always moving, always alone." "Why?" Rebecca asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "After Sarah." Grant's voice grew tight. "After I failed her, I didn't feel I deserved to build a life. To put down roots, so I kept moving. It was easier than facing what happened." Rebecca reached across the small space between them, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You didn't fail her, Grant. You tried to help. Blackstone is the one responsible for what happened." His fingers tightened around hers. "Maybe. But helping you, seeing your courage, it's made me think about things differently." He met her gaze directly. "You make me want to stop running, Rebecca." Her heart quickened at his words, at the vulnerability in his voice. "I've spent my whole life doing what others expected," she said quietly. "My father, my brothers, they always decided what I could be, who I could become, until I ran." "And now?" Grant asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Now I want to decide for myself. To build something that's mine, something real." Rebecca took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "And I think I'd like you to be part of that." In the firelight, she saw something kindle in Grant's eyes, hope perhaps, or a longing that matched her own. He moved closer, his hand releasing hers only to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Rebecca," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility. Then, with infinite gentleness, Grant leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a demand. Rebecca answered by moving closer, her hand coming to rest against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. Grant rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. "I never expected this," he said softly. "Never expected you." Rebecca smiled, a newfound confidence filling her. "Life rarely gives us what we expect, Mr. Hayes." He chuckled, the sound warming her more than the fire. "No, it certainly doesn't, Miss Jordan." They talked late into the night, sharing stories from their lives before they'd met, building a bridge of understanding between them. Rebecca told him about her mother, about the dreams she'd had as a girl that had been slowly smothered beneath her father's expectations. Grant spoke of his childhood in Missouri, of the war that had changed him, of the years of wandering that had led him to that snowy pass where their paths had crossed. As sleep finally claimed them, they remained close. Grant's arm draped protectively around Rebecca's waist, her head nestled against his shoulder. For the first time since fleeing her father's house, Rebecca fell asleep without fear shadowing her dreams. Morning came with a knock on the barn door. Harriet entered with a pot of coffee and fresh bread, finding them already awake and packing their belongings. "Figured you'd want an early start," she said, setting down the breakfast. "Storm coming in from the north. You'll want to be over Carson Ridge before it hits." "Thank you," Grant said, accepting a cup of the strong black coffee, "for everything." Harriet studied them, her weathered face inscrutable. "You know," she said finally, "you two don't much look like you've been married long." Rebecca tensed, but Grant remained calm. "What makes you say that?" "Just an observation." Harriet's gaze shifted to Rebecca. "Your hair's growing out dark at the roots, unusual for a natural blonde." Rebecca's hand went instinctively to her hair, which she had indeed dyed blonde 6 months ago in a small act of rebellion that had infuriated her father. "You're Rebecca Jordan, aren't you?" Harriet asked directly. "From Independence." Grant moved subtly, positioning himself between Rebecca and the door. "What makes you think that? News travels even up here." Harriet's expression remained neutral. "Word is Silas Jordan's offering $1,000 for his daughter's return. Says she was kidnapped by a drifter." "That's not what happened," Rebecca said firmly, stepping forward. "I ran away. My father was forcing me to marry Henry Blackstone." "Blackstone?" Harriet's face hardened. "That miserable snake." Grant looked surprised. "You know him?" "Know of him. His men came through here last year looking to buy my land for some mining venture. When I refused to sell, they became insistent." Her hand drifted to a scar visible at the edge of her hairline. "Let's just say I didn't appreciate their methods of negotiation." She looked between them, decision made. "You're running from the Jordans and Blackstone. That makes you welcome in my home." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small pouch, which she handed to Grant. "There's a trapper's cabin 2 days' ride from here, just past Carson Ridge. It's well hidden, marked on this map. You can shelter there if the storm gets bad." Grant accepted the pouch with evident surprise. "Why are you helping us?" Harriet's smile was bitter. 20 years ago, I was in a similar situation. No one helped me then. Had to shoot my way out." She nodded to Rebecca. "Sometimes women have to make hard choices to be free. I respect that." As they prepared to leave, loading their supplies and saddling the horses, Harriet pulled Rebecca aside. "That man of yours," she said quietly. "He loves you. I can see it in the way he watches you when you're not looking, like you're something precious he's afraid might disappear." Rebecca glanced at Grant, who was checking the cinch on Penny's saddle. "I know," she said softly. "Good." Harriet pressed something into Rebecca's hand, a small revolver, different from the one Grant had given her. "Keep this hidden. Even good men can't always protect us from everything." Rebecca tucked the weapon into her boot. "Thank you." They departed with Harriet's directions fresh in their minds, heading northwest toward Carson Ridge. The day was clear but cold, the promised storm visible only as a dark line on the distant horizon. "She knew who we were all along," Rebecca said as they rode. Grant nodded. "I suspected as much." "But she chose to help anyway." "Do you think there are others who might?" Hope colored Rebecca's voice. "People who would understand why I ran." "More than you might think," Grant replied. "Not everyone believes a woman should be treated as property to be traded or sold." They rode in companionable silence for several miles, the landscape gradually changing as they ascended toward the ridge. Snow lay deeper here, untouched by human passage. Their horses struggled at times, forcing them to dismount and lead the animals through the worst drifts. By midday, they had reached the base of Carson Ridge, a steep forested incline that would test both their endurance and that of their mounts. Grant studied the sky with concern. "Storm's moving faster than I'd like," he observed. "We should push to get over the ridge before it hits." Rebecca nodded, though exhaustion was beginning to weigh on her. The past days of hard travel, combined with her ordeal in the river, had taken their toll. Still, she knew they couldn't afford to rest, not with her family and Blackstone's men potentially still on their trail. The ascent was grueling. Twice Penny slipped on icy patches, nearly going down. Grant's stallion fared better, but even he struggled with the terrain. By late afternoon, they were only halfway up, and the storm clouds were rapidly approaching, darkening the sky. "We need to find shelter," Grant finally admitted. "We won't make it over before the storm hits." They veered off the main path, following a game trail that led to a small overhang of rock, not ideal, but better than being exposed to the full fury of the approaching blizzard. Grant quickly constructed a makeshift shelter, using pine branches and their blankets to create a windbreak similar to the one he'd built at the cave. The storm hit just as they finished securing the horses in a sheltered spot nearby. The temperature plummeted as wind drove snow horizontally across the mountainside. Inside their crude shelter, Grant built a small fire, but the heat it provided seemed insignificant against the cold that seeped through their improvised walls. Rebecca huddled close to the flames, her teeth chattering despite the layers she wore. Grant settled beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and drawing her against him. "We should have stayed at Harriet's," Rebecca said, her voice shaking from cold. "Maybe," Grant agreed. "But staying in one place too long is dangerous. Your family could have picked up our trail." Rebecca turned her face into his shoulder, seeking warmth. "Will we die here, Grant?" His arm tightened around her. "No," he said firmly. "I've survived worse storms than this. We just need to wait it out." As darkness fell, the storm intensified. Wind howled around their shelter, finding every gap in their defenses, driving snow through the smallest openings. Grant worked constantly to maintain the fire, but their supply of dry wood was dwindling rapidly. In the worst hours of the night, when the cold seemed to penetrate to their very bones, Grant held Rebecca close, sharing what body heat remained between them. They spoke little, conserving energy, but in the darkness, their hands found each other, fingers intertwined in silent reassurance. "Tell me about Sacramento," Rebecca whispered during a brief lull in the wind. "What's it like?" Grant seemed to understand her need for distraction. "It's growing fast," he said, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Fine buildings, shops of all kinds. Ladies in fashionable dresses promenading down K Street." He smiled against her hair. "You'd look beautiful in one of those fancy dresses." Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to picture it. "And Double Creek, what will it be like living there?" "Peaceful," Grant said softly. "Rolling hills, oak trees scattered across the pastures. The main house sits on a rise overlooking the property, white with green shutters. Eliner's garden is famous throughout the county." His voice took on a wistful quality. "In spring, the wildflowers cover the hills in blue and gold. Like nothing you've ever seen." "It sounds like paradise," Rebecca murmured. "It could be," Grant replied, and something in his tone made her look up at him. Even in the dim firelight, she could see the emotion in his eyes. "Rebecca, when all this is over, when you're safe at Double Creek, I want you to know you're free to choose your own path. You don't owe me anything." She frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" Grant hesitated. "Last night in the barn, what happened between us. I don't want you to feel obligated. You've spent your life under your father's control. I won't be another man who limits your freedom." Rebecca pulled back slightly, studying his face. "Do you regret kissing me?" "No," he answered immediately. "God, no, but I need you to understand your life is your own. Whatever you decide to do once we reach Double Creek, I'll respect it." Rebecca felt a mixture of frustration and tenderness. This man, who had risked everything to save her, was now offering to step aside if that was what she wanted. His selflessness both touched and exasperated her. "Grant Hayes," she said firmly, "do you honestly believe I would have kissed you out of some misplaced sense of obligation?" He blinked, clearly surprised by her directness. Because if so, you understand very little about me." Rebecca placed her hand against his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. "I may have spent my life doing what others expected, but I left that behind when I fled my father's house. What happened between us wasn't gratitude or obligation. It was my choice, a choice I'd make again." To emphasize her point, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Unlike their first kiss, tentative and questioning, this one held certainty. Grant responded immediately, his arms tightening around her, one hand tangling in her hair as he deepened the kiss. When they finally parted, both breathless despite the cold, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I've been alone so long," he confessed quietly. "The thought of building something with someone, of building something with you, it terrifies me almost as much as it gives me hope." "Me too," Rebecca admitted. "But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe with anyone else." They held each other through the night as the storm raged around them. Sometime before dawn, the wind finally began to ease, the worst of the blizzard passing over them and continuing eastward. When morning came, they emerged from their shelter to find the world transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, the familiar landscape rendered alien by its pristine white covering. Their horses had survived the night, huddled together beneath the crude shelter Grant had constructed for them. After feeding and watering the animals, they packed their few belongings and prepared to continue their journey. The storm had left the trail nearly impassable. They were forced to break their own path through deep snow, leading the horses on foot much of the time. Progress was painfully slow, and by midday they had covered less than 2 miles. "At this rate, it will take us days to reach the trapper's cabin," Rebecca observed, pausing to catch her breath. The exertion of walking through deep snow had left her exhausted. Grant studied the terrain ahead, his expression troubled. "We need to find a better route. This isn't sustainable." They continued along the ridge, searching for a path less burdened by snow. Near a stand of tall pines, Grant spotted what appeared to be a game trail, the snow there disturbed by the passage of animals. "This might work," he said, leading his stallion toward the trail. "Animals usually find the easiest paths through difficult terrain." The trail did indeed prove easier going, the snow less deep beneath the shelter of the pines. They made better progress, descending slightly from the main ridge into a narrow valley that ran parallel to their intended route. As afternoon waned, they began to look for a suitable place to make camp for the night. The valley had narrowed further, hemmed in by steep slopes on either side. Grant pointed to a cluster of boulders ahead that might provide some shelter from the wind. They were approaching the rocks when a sound stopped them both, the unmistakable metallic click of a rifle being cocked. "That's far enough," a voice called from above. "Hands where I can see them." Grant and Rebecca froze, slowly raising their hands. From behind the boulders emerged 3 men, all armed, their faces partially hidden by scarves against the cold. "Well now," said the apparent leader, a tall man with cold blue eyes visible above his scarf. "What have we here? Travelers lost in the mountains." He lowered his rifle slightly, studying them. "Or perhaps a runaway daughter and her accomplice." Rebecca's blood ran cold. These weren't her brothers or her father's men. These were bounty hunters. "We're just passing through," Grant said calmly, though Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders. "Heading to Sacramento for work." The leader laughed. "Is that so? Funny coincidence, then, that you match the description of the folks Silas Jordan is offering $1,000 to find. He gestured with his rifle. Blonde woman traveling with a tall man with green eyes. Rebecca noticed Grant's hand drifting subtly toward his sidearm. The bounty hunter noticed too. "I wouldn't," he warned, raising his rifle again. "There's 3 of us and 2 of you. And the lady doesn't look like much of a gunfighter." One of the other men approached, circling behind Rebecca. "It's her all right. Recognize her from the description. Rebecca Jordan." He reached out to touch her hair and Rebecca flinched away. "Keep your hands off her," Grant growled, taking a half-step forward. The leader's rifle swung toward him. "Stay where you are. I'd rather take you back alive to collect the full bounty, but dead works too." Rebecca's mind raced frantically. The small revolver Harriet had given her was still hidden in her boot, but she had no illusion that she could outdraw 3 experienced gunmen. Her gaze met Grant's briefly, seeing the calculation in his eyes. He was planning something, but what? "Look," Grant said reasonably, "there's no need for anyone to get hurt. You want the reward, fine. But Jordan's offering $1,000 for his daughter unharmed. You damage her, you'll get nothing." The leader considered this, then nodded. "Fair point, tie them both up," he ordered his companions. "We'll camp here tonight and head back to Independence tomorrow." As one of the men approached with a length of rope, Grant suddenly moved. In one fluid motion, he drew his revolver and fired, hitting the nearest bounty hunter in the shoulder. The man went down with a cry of pain. "Run!" Grant shouted to Rebecca, diving behind a boulder as the leader and the remaining bounty hunter opened fire. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She sprinted for the cover of the trees, bullets kicking up snow around her feet. Behind her, she heard the exchange of gunfire, Grant providing covering fire as she fled. Once in the trees, she pulled the small revolver from her boot, her hands shaking but determined. She couldn't leave Grant to face 3 armed men alone. Staying low, she circled back toward the boulders, approaching from a different angle than the one she'd fled. From her new position, she could see Grant pinned down behind a rock, exchanging occasional shots with the leader who had taken cover behind a fallen tree. The wounded bounty hunter was still on the ground, while the 3rd man was attempting to circle around to flank Grant. Rebecca took a deep breath, steadying her aim as her father had taught her years ago during hunting trips. When the 3rd bounty hunter passed between 2 trees, momentarily exposed, she fired. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to make the man dive for cover, alerting Grant to his position. The firefight continued for several tense minutes. Rebecca fired twice more, forcing the bounty hunters to divide their attention. Grant, recognizing her strategy, used the distraction to change position, working his way closer to their opponents. The tide turned when Grant managed to hit the leader in the leg, a well-placed shot that sent the man sprawling in the snow. With their leader down, the remaining uninjured bounty hunter called out for a ceasefire. "Enough," he shouted. "We're done." Grant emerged cautiously from cover, his rifle trained on the wounded men. "Throw out your weapons, all of them." The bounty hunters complied, their guns landing in the snow several feet from their positions. Rebecca approached carefully, her small revolver still raised. "Tie them up," Grant told her, keeping his rifle aimed at the men. "Use their own ropes." With shaking hands, Rebecca bound the bounty hunters, using the rope they had intended for her and Grant. The leader glared at her as she secured his wrists. "Jordan will never stop looking for you," he spat. "And Blackstone's offering his own reward now. You'll never be free." Rebecca finished the knot with a sharp tug. "I already am free," she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. When all 3 men were securely tied, Grant collected their weapons, emptying the ammunition and scattering it in the deep snow. He left them a single knife, placed just out of immediate reach. "That's enough for you to free yourselves eventually," he told them. "But not before we're long gone. If I were you, I'd reconsider whether Jordan's bounty is worth your lives." Taking the reins of their horses, which had scattered during the gunfight but not fled far, Grant and Rebecca quickly mounted and rode away, leaving the bounty hunters cursing in the snow behind them. They rode hard until darkness made further travel dangerous, finally stopping in a small clearing sheltered by towering pines. Neither spoke much as they made camp, the close call with the bounty hunters having shaken them both. As they sat beside their small fire, Rebecca finally broke the silence. "They'll come after us again." Grant nodded grimly. "Probably, but we've bought some time." He examined the map Harriet had given them. "The trapper's cabin should be less than a day's ride from here. We can rest there, then make a final push to Double Creek." Rebecca stared into the flames. "It's never going to end, is it? My father, Blackstone, they'll keep hunting us." Grant set aside the map and moved closer, taking her cold hands in his. "Rebecca, look at me." When she did, he continued, "Once we reach Double Creek, you'll have protection. Wilson has influence in Sacramento. He can help us make your case to the authorities that you left of your own free will, that your father was forcing you into marriage. Will that be enough?" Grant's expression was determined. "If not, we'll go further. San Francisco, even Oregon territory if necessary. Whatever it takes to ensure your freedom." "Our freedom," Rebecca corrected softly. "I won't go without you." The tenderness that filled Grant's eyes made her heart swell. "Then we'll face whatever comes together," he promised. They held each other close that night, finding comfort in each other's presence despite the danger that still pursued them. As Rebecca drifted toward sleep in Grant's arms, she realized that despite everything, the cold, the fear, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she had never felt more alive, more true to herself than in these days since fleeing her father's house. She was becoming the woman she had always wanted to be. And Grant Hayes, this man who had appeared like an answered prayer on that snowy pass, was becoming as essential to her as breathing. The trapper's cabin proved to be exactly where Harriet had marked it on the map, a sturdy structure built against a natural stone outcropping that sheltered it from the worst of the mountain weather. It was well hidden, accessible only by a narrow path that wound through dense pine forest. "Harriet said the trapper won't return until spring," Grant observed as they approached cautiously. "But we should still be careful." The cabin appeared deserted, no smoke rising from its chimney, no tracks in the snow around it. Still, Grant insisted on circling the perimeter before approaching directly, checking for any sign of recent occupation or, worse, an ambush. Satisfied that they were alone, they led their tired horses to a small lean-to adjacent to the cabin. Inside, they found the structure simple but solid, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a narrow bed built into one wall, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. "It's perfect," Rebecca said, relief evident in her voice as she sank onto a chair. "How long can we stay?" Grant was already building a fire in the grate. "1 day. Maybe 2 if the weather turns. We need to rest the horses and ourselves, but we can't afford to linger too long." Once the fire was going, Grant checked their supplies while Rebecca explored the cabin more thoroughly. She found clean blankets in a chest, jars of preserved meat and vegetables on the shelves, even a small collection of books, treasures for someone who'd been on the run for nearly 2 weeks. "The trapper lives well," she observed, holding up a jar of preserved peaches. "Better than I would have expected for someone so isolated." Grant smiled, the first real smile she'd seen since their encounter with the bounty hunters. Mountain men have their priorities. Good food gets you through the long winters. They prepared a simple but satisfying meal from their own supplies, and those found in the cabin, careful to use only what they needed and leaving payment ammunition and coffee in exchange for what they took. After days of cold camps and hasty meals on the trail, sitting at a proper table felt like unimaginable luxury. As they ate, Grant updated their route on Harriet's map. From here, we drop down to the foothills, then follow the Sacramento River Valley north. 2, maybe 3 days to Double Creek if the weather holds and we push hard. Rebecca studied the map, tracing the line of their journey with her finger. We've come so far already. And have the hardest part behind us, Grant agreed. The mountains were the greatest challenge. The valley will be easier going, though more populated. After they had eaten and tended to the horses, exhaustion claimed them both. There was only the single narrow bed, but neither suggested alternative sleeping arrangements. It seemed natural now to share this small space, to find comfort in each other's presence. As they lay together beneath the blankets, the fire casting a warm glow across the cabin, Rebecca found herself thinking of the future, not just the immediate journey to Double Creek, but beyond. "What will you do?" she asked softly, her head resting on Grant's shoulder. "When we reach Wilson's ranch, will you stay?" Grant was quiet for a moment, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "I want to," he finally said. "For the first time in years, I want to stay somewhere, build something." He shifted slightly to look at her. "But much depends on you, on me. Rebecca, these past 2 weeks, they've changed me, you've changed me." His voice grew serious. "But I meant what I said before. Your freedom is what matters most." "I won't presume to," she silenced him with a kiss, soft but insistent. When she pulled back, her eyes held his in the firelight. "Grant Hayes, for a perceptive man, you can be remarkably dense sometimes." A smile tugged at his lips. "Is that so?" "It is." Rebecca traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I've made my choice. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you. Not because you rescued me, not because I owe you, but because in you I've found something I never knew I was looking for." The vulnerability in Grant's expression took her breath away. "And what's that?" "A partner," she said simply. "Someone who sees me as I am, who values my strength instead of trying to control it. Someone I can build a life with as equals." Grant caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Is that a proposal, Miss Jordan?" Rebecca laughed softly. "Perhaps it is, Mr. Hayes. Does it frighten you?" "Terrifies me," he admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. "And yet nothing has ever felt more right." They sealed this unspoken promise with a kiss that deepened, speaking of futures intertwined and barriers falling away. In the safety of the trapper's cabin, far from pursuing family and bounty hunters, they found in each other a refuge more secure than any walls could provide. When dawn broke, filtering through the cabin's small windows, Rebecca woke to find Grant already up, tending the fire and preparing coffee. He smiled when he saw her watching him, bringing her a steaming cup as she sat up in bed. "You look rested," he observed, settling beside her. "The first good sleep we've had in days." Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully. "I dreamt of Double Creek, of the life you described, the white house with green shutters, the rolling hills with wildflowers." Grant's expression softened. "It won't be easy, you know. Building a new life never is." "I know," Rebecca said quietly, "but nothing worthwhile ever comes easily." They spent the day resting and preparing for the final leg of their journey. Grant cleaned and oiled their firearms, checked the horses' shoes, and repacked their supplies. Rebecca washed their clothes in melted snow, hanging them by the fire to dry, and prepared food for the days ahead. In the afternoon, they ventured out to check their surroundings. alert for any sign that the bounty hunters had somehow tracked them to the cabin. The forest remained peaceful, undisturbed except for the occasional track of deer or rabbit in the snow. As the day waned, they discussed their route once more, planning each step of the journey to Double Creek. Grant was confident they could reach the ranch within 3 days if they pushed hard and encountered no further trouble. "Wilson doesn't know we're coming," he admitted, "but he'll welcome us. He's a good man." "And his wife?" Rebecca asked. "Will she mind a stranger arriving without warning?" Grant smiled. "Eleanor Wilson has a soft spot for strays, human or animal. She'll probably have you settled in the best guest room before I've finished explaining why we're there." That night, as they prepared for sleep, Rebecca noticed Grant watching her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. When she met his gaze questioningly, he crossed the small cabin to stand before her, taking both her hands in his. "Rebecca," he began, his voice low and serious. "Before we reach Double Creek, before we face whatever comes next, I need you to know something." She waited, sensing the importance of this moment. "I've spent years running from the past, from what happened with Sarah, from the guilt I carried." Grant's green eyes held hers steadily. "Meeting you, helping you, at first it was a way to atone for my failures. But somewhere along the way it became so much more." He released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. "I never expected to find love again, never thought I deserved it, but I love you, Rebecca Jordan. With everything I am." The simple declaration, spoken without flourish or pretense, filled Rebecca with a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. All her life, she had waited for someone to see her, truly see her for who she was, not what she represented or what she could provide. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming easily, naturally. "I think perhaps I began falling in love with you that very first night when you appeared at the pass with a fresh horse and the promise of freedom." Grant smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his serious face. "That wasn't exactly how I planned to court a lady." Rebecca laughed softly. "Nothing about us has followed the usual path, has it?" "No," he agreed, drawing her closer. "And I wouldn't change a moment of it." Their kiss was different this time, not tentative or questioning, not born of desperation or relief, but a promise. A beginning. In the warmth of the trapper's cabin, with the fire crackling and snow falling gently outside, they affirmed what both had come to know, that in finding each other, they had found home. They departed the cabin at first light, leaving it as they had found it, save for the payment left on the table for the supplies they'd used. The weather had improved overnight, the sky clear and blue, the sun casting long shadows across the pristine snow. The path from the mountains to the foothills proved easier than expected. They made good time, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By evening, they had descended enough that the snow lay thinner on the ground, the temperature noticeably milder than in the high country. They camped that night in a protected hollow, their fire small to avoid attracting attention. Though they had seen no sign of pursuit since their encounter with the bounty hunters, both remained vigilant, aware that they were now entering more populated areas where news of the reward for Rebecca's return might have spread. The next day brought them to the edge of the Sacramento Valley. From a high bluff, they could see the river winding through the landscape below, surrounded by farms and ranches. In the far distance, the faint smudge of smoke indicated the city of Sacramento itself. "We're close," Grant said, pointing northwest. "Double Creek is about 20 miles in that direction, near the foothills." Rebecca studied the valley spread before them, its vastness both intimidating and exhilarating. This was her new beginning, this land she had never seen before. "It's beautiful," she said softly. They descended into the valley, following less traveled paths to avoid the main roads where they might be recognized. The terrain was easier here, allowing them to make good progress despite their caution. Late in the afternoon, they crossed the property line of the Double Creek Ranch, marked by a simple wooden sign showing a stylized creek with two branches. The ranch was larger than Rebecca had imagined, vast pastures dotted with cattle, fenced corrals containing horses of obvious quality, outbuildings that spoke of a prosperous operation. As they approached the main house, white with green shutters, just as Grant had described, Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Their journey was nearly over, but what awaited them here was still uncertain. Grant sensed her unease. "It will be all right," he assured her. "Wilson is a man of his word. Once he understands our situation, he'll stand by us." Before they reached the house, a rider emerged from one of the outbuildings, heading directly toward them. As he drew closer, Rebecca saw a man about Grant's age, with sandy hair and a weathered face creased in a welcoming smile. "Hayes," the man called, urging his horse faster. "Is that really you, you old devil?" Grant's face broke into a grin. "Wilson. Thought you might be out checking the north pasture." The men dismounted, clasping hands in a greeting that quickly turned into a brief embrace. Rebecca watched, touched by the genuine affection between them. "It's been too long," Wilson said, stepping back to look at Grant. "What, 3 years since you passed through?" "About that." Grant turned to Rebecca, extending his hand to help her dismount. "Sam, I'd like you to meet Rebecca Jordan. Rebecca, this is Samuel Wilson, owner of Double Creek and the best horseman west of the Mississippi." Wilson doffed his hat politely. "Miss Jordan, a pleasure." His keen eyes took in her travel-worn appearance and the evident exhaustion in both their faces. "You two look like you've had quite a journey." Grant's expression grew serious. "We have, and we need your help, Sam." Wilson nodded, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation. "Come to the house. Eleanor will see you fed and settled. We can talk after." The main house was everything Grant had described: spacious and well-appointed, without being ostentatious. Eleanor Wilson proved to be a handsome woman in her early 40s, with a warm smile and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. She welcomed Rebecca with genuine kindness, immediately arranging hot baths, clean clothes, and a meal that seemed like a feast after weeks of trail rations. Later, seated in Wilson's study with coffee and brandy, Grant explained their situation: Rebecca's flight from an arranged marriage to Blackstone, their journey through the mountains, the pursuit by her family and bounty hunters. Wilson listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. When Grant finished, he looked to Rebecca. "Miss Jordan, I want you to know that you are welcome here for as long as you wish to stay. No one will force you to return to your father's house." Relief washed over Rebecca. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson." "Sam," he corrected with a smile. "We don't stand on formality at Double Creek." "There's more," Grant said, his hand finding Rebecca's in a gesture that did not go unnoticed by their host. "Rebecca and we've come to care for each other deeply." Wilson's eyes twinkled. "I gathered as much." His expression sobered. "But Jordan and Blackstone are powerful men. They won't give up easily, especially with their pride at stake." "What can we do?" Rebecca asked. Wilson considered for a moment. "I have connections in Sacramento, friends in the legislature, judges who owe me favors. We can file legal papers establishing your right to determine your own future, Miss Jordan. You're of age, after all." "And until then," Grant pressed, "until then you stay here. Double Creek has plenty of hands who are handy with firearms, and none of them would take kindly to bounty hunters trespassing on our land." Wilson smiled grimly. "Jordan and Blackstone may have influence in independence, But this is Sacramento County. Different rules apply here. For the first time since fleeing her father's house, Rebecca felt truly safe. The weight that had pressed upon her for weeks began to lift, allowing her to breathe freely again. That night, settled in the comfortable guest room Alina had prepared for her, Rebecca stood at the window looking out at the moonlit expanse of Double Creek Ranch. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Grant entered at her invitation, closing the door quietly behind him. Clean-shaven and dressed in fresh clothes borrowed from Wilson, he looked younger, less burdened. "I wanted to check on you," he said, remaining near the door. "Make sure you have everything you need." Rebecca smiled, crossing the room to stand before him. "Almost everything." His eyebrow raised in question. "What's missing?" In answer, she reached up to touch his face, drawing him down for a gentle kiss. "Nothing now," she whispered against his lips. Grant's arms encircled her waist, holding her close as if reassuring himself that they had indeed reached safety, that the dangers of their journey were behind them. "Wilson says his lawyer will be here tomorrow. He seems confident we can resolve the legal issues quickly." "And then?" Rebecca asked, looking up at him. "And then we begin," Grant said simply. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The next week passed in a blur of activity. Wilson's lawyer arrived as promised, taking detailed statements from both Rebecca and Grant. Legal papers were drawn up and filed in Sacramento, formally declaring Rebecca's independence from her father's control and documenting her refusal to marry Blackstone. Word came from Independence that Silas Jordan was furious at the legal challenge, threatening to come to Sacramento himself to reclaim his daughter. Blackstone, however, had withdrawn his interest in the marriage, apparently unwilling to face the public scandal that now threatened. Through it all, the Double Creek Ranch provided a haven. Alina Wilson took Rebecca under her wing, introducing her to the workings of the household and offering quiet friendship that Rebecca, having lost her mother years before, found profoundly comforting. Grant, meanwhile, began working with the ranch horses, his skill quickly earning the respect of the other hands. At night, he and Rebecca would walk together under the stars, planning their future in quiet conversations that often stretched late into the evening. 10 days after their arrival, the final legal documents arrived from Sacramento. Rebecca was officially recognized as an independent woman, free to make her own decisions without her father's consent. The bounty for her return was declared null and void, any attempt to forcibly return her to independence deemed kidnapping under the law. That evening, Wilson hosted a small celebration dinner. As they raised glasses to toast Rebecca's freedom, Grant excused himself briefly, returning moments later with something concealed in his hand. "Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence that fell over the table. "You once asked what I was running toward instead of away from." He knelt beside her chair, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold ring. "I'm running toward you, toward the future we can build together." Rebecca's breath caught as Grant took her hand in his. "When I met you on that snowy pass," he continued, "I was a man with no direction, no purpose beyond the next horizon. You changed that. You changed me." Wilson and Alina exchanged knowing smiles as Grant continued. "I know it hasn't been long, but sometimes a lifetime can happen in a few weeks." "I love you, Rebecca Jordan. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she looked down at this man who had risked everything for her, who had shown her what true partnership could be. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I will marry you, Grant Hayes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, though how he had managed that remained his secret, the small gathering erupted in cheers and congratulations. Wilson produced champagne, and toasts were offered to the newly engaged couple. Later that night, as they walked together beneath a canopy of stars, Rebecca asked, "Where did you get the ring?" "We've barely left the ranch since arriving." Grant smiled, a hint of mischief in his green eyes. "I may have asked Alina to help me. Turns out she has quite a collection of jewelry, including several rings that belonged to her mother." Rebecca examined the simple gold band, its surface catching the moonlight. "It's perfect." "Like the woman wearing it," Grant replied, drawing her close. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony held in the Double Creek Ranch's garden. Alina had insisted on helping Rebecca create a proper wedding dress, and the result was more beautiful than anything Rebecca could have imagined: ivory silk with delicate embroidery, elegant without being ostentatious. The guest list was small: the Wilsons, their closest ranch hands, and a few friends from nearby properties. Harriet Doyle arrived the day before the ceremony, having received Wilson's invitation, and traveled all the way from her mountain homestead to witness the union of the couple she had helped along their journey. As Rebecca walked toward Grant, who waited beneath an arbor covered in early spring flowers, she reflected on the incredible path that had led her here. Less than 2 months ago, she had fled her father's house in terror, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope for freedom. Now she approached a future brighter than any she had dared to dream of: a life with a man who saw her strength as a gift rather than a flaw, who valued her independence even as he offered his partnership. Grant watched her approach, his green eyes never leaving hers, his expression one of wonder and love so profound it took her breath away. As she reached him, taking his outstretched hands, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, survivors who had found in each other not just salvation, but a reason to build rather than merely exist. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Rebecca barely heard the words, lost in the promise of Grant's gaze, in the future that stretched before them like an unwritten page, waiting for their story to unfold. The vows they exchanged were simple but heartfelt, promises to stand together through whatever life might bring, to support each other's dreams, to build a partnership based on mutual respect and enduring love. When Grant slipped the gold band onto her finger, now joined by a matching wedding ring, and the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rebecca felt a sense of homecoming more profound than any she had ever known. Their kiss, witnessed by their small gathering of friends, sealed not just their marriage but the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. Wilson had arranged for a small cabin on the property to be prepared for them, a wedding gift, he explained, until they decided whether to stay at Double Creek or establish their own place. As darkness fell, Grant and Rebecca slipped away from the festivities, riding together to the cabin that would be their first home. It was a simple structure, but Alina had worked her magic, transforming it with fresh curtains, comfortable furnishings, and vases of wildflowers that filled the rooms with fragrance. "What do you think?" Grant asked as they stood in the doorway, his arm around Rebecca's waist. "It's not grand, but it's perfect," Rebecca interrupted, turning in his arms to face him. "It's ours." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Rebecca rested her head on Grant's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever think about that night at Farwell Pass?" she asked softly. "How different everything would be if you hadn't been there with that fresh horse." Grant's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I think about it often," he admitted. "How close we came to never meeting. If Martha hadn't overheard your father's plans in the store that day, if I hadn't been in town." "It seems impossible," Rebecca mused. So many coincidences had to align for us to find each other. Maybe not coincidences, Grant suggested. Maybe some paths are meant to cross, no matter how unlikely it seems. Rebecca smiled against his skin. The mysterious cowboy with the philosophical streak, Grant chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. Only with you, Mrs. Hayes, only with you. Her new name sent a thrill through Rebecca. She was no longer Rebecca Jordan, defined by her father's expectations and demands. She was Rebecca Hayes, partner to this remarkable man, free to build the life they chose together. I love you, Grant Hayes, she whispered, raising her face to his. His kiss was tender, filled with promise. And I love you, Rebecca Hayes, until the end of my days. In the years that followed, the story of the Jordan's daughter who fled through the snow and the cowboy who met her at the pass with a fresh horse became something of a legend in Northern California. Details changed with each telling the height of the snowdrifts, the number of pursuers, the dangers faced along the journey, but the heart of the tale remained the same. A young woman's courage and a man's unwavering support, a love forged in adversity and tempered by shared purpose. Rebecca and Grant eventually purchased land adjacent to Double Creek, establishing their own smaller ranch where they raised horses renowned throughout the state for their quality and temperament. Rebecca also opened a dressmaking shop in Sacramento, her designs quickly becoming sought after by the city's elite. 2 years after their wedding, Rebecca gave birth to their first child, a son they named Samuel, after the friend who had given them sanctuary when they needed it most. A daughter followed 3 years later, named Harriet in honor of the mountain woman who had helped them on their journey. Silas Jordan never reconciled with his daughter, his pride too wounded by her defiance and the public nature of her escape. He died 5 years after Rebecca's flight, his ranch divided among her brothers. Henry Blackstone eventually left Independence following financial difficulties, his reputation tarnished by rumors of cruelty that could no longer be suppressed. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting at Farwell Pass, Grant surprised Rebecca with a journey back to the mountains. They rode together through the pass where they had first met, now transformed by summer's greenery rather than winter's snow. Standing at the spot where Grant had once appeared with a fresh horse and the promise of freedom, Rebecca turned to her husband, her heart full. Did you ever imagine that night what would come of your decision to help a stranger? She asked. Grant smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening, lines earned through a decade of laughter, of raising children, of building a life rich with purpose and love. I knew I was saving you, he said, taking her hand in his. I never expected you would save me too. As they stood together in the mountain pass where their story had begun, Rebecca reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them here, not just the desperate flight through the snow, but all that had followed. The freedom she had sought that winter night had led to so much more than escape. It had led to Grant, to their children, to a life built on their own terms. And it had all begun with a family's pursuit through the snow, and a cowboy who had appeared, like an answer to an unspoken prayer, with a fresh horse and the courage to ride beside her into an unknown future.